Early game meta for ReFantazio is kind of a different experience in comparison to other Atlus JRPGs. In other games like Persona or the mainline SMT games, they start you off with a limited skill pool or party arrangement, or maybe both. It is quite different in meta for ReFantazio. Not only could you have any character fill a variety of roles between physical, magic, support, and healing, you could also have duplicates of said roles within one party. You have a lot of freedom in formulating a strategy or a playstyle of your own here, and it's actually really cool. Even though there are only a handful of archetypes early in the game, some are much better than others, and for this video I want to look at what I think are the top 3 archetypes, at least in the early game of meta for ReFantazio. Let's cast onto the number 3 spot the Mage archetype, which is also the 3rd archetype you unlock. The Mage is straightforward, it has a high magic stat, and its skills are pure offensive magic, and it learns 3 elements, fire, ice, and lightning. And this is half the reason for the Mage's number 3 spot on this list. This is amazing coverage for a singular character early on in the game. Hitting enemy weaknesses and getting extra actions is a breeze for mages, and anything it can't cover can be made up with its one inherited skill. I would say the light skill Hama is a good choice to counter the early game dungeons, but you could also slot in a healing skill, which will only benefit from the high magic stat of the mage. The second reason the mage is good is the hero passive. Equip your main character with the mage and they'll have magic recovery, which recovers everyone's MP by 1 per enemy stunned or killed in overworld combat. So this doesn't sound like much at first glance, but with how little MP recovery items you get in the early game, running out of MP in a dungeon run is kind of inevitable. A single area in the game can have up to 20 enemies that you can just eliminate in overworld combat. That's 20 free MP right there for everybody. If you're deep into a dungeon, you can return to a previous area for any enemies that might have respawned. Plus, you'll eventually run into trance crystals, which provides a limitless spawn of enemies that you can just kill for extra MP. All of this means you don't have to leave the dungeon as much just to recover your stats. Now, for its synthesis skills, there's some extra utility here, but it's more situational in its benefits. The Gauss skills cast magic that hits all enemies, but it's only worth using if you can hit at least one weakness and no enemy that's immune to the element you're casting. Either that or you hit 3 enemies at once. The tier 2 magic it enables is questionable, as one could argue that you can get more out of simply casting the tier 1 counterpart and get more out of it. I feel it's also unnecessary to have 2 mages in your party at once. This is because mages are kinda one-dimensional, and the second inheritance slot of the mage doesn't unlock until mid-game, which really limits the archetype's versatility later on. So, its synthesis skills are lackluster, but its ability to snipe weaknesses and recover MP at a point where there are few alternatives makes Mage an excellent early archetype for both long dungeon stretches and adding extra damage with half-turn icons. Cashing in their way into the number 2 spot is the Merchant, a unique archetype that uses money as a resource. The Merchant has a lot of perks that no other archetype holds. First off, let's talk about its unique offensive skill, Gold Attack. It's a weak physical attack that costs 500 Reeve to use, Reeve being the currency in the game. The thing about it is, it deals almighty damage, a property that's unaffected by resistances. Almighty's been present in Megaton for as long as I can remember, but having it this early in the game is absurd. One drawback of the property though is that no enemy is weak to it, so normally you can't get extra turns with this. This is offset, however, by the increased critical hit rate of the move itself. Plus, the archetype has a high luck stat increase, giving you better chances to land crits. The 500 Reeve cost can also be seen as a benefit, as while you're using it, you won't be feeling the resource drain while in battle, unlike with other classes using HP or MP. And as an additional plus, Gold Attack deals full damage even from the back row, which I find strange because this is a physical attack. Is it because it's an almighty skill? I'm actually not sure. That being said, 500 Reeve is still quite a steep cost for early game, especially for an attack that you intend to use repeatedly, and this is where its hero passive comes in. Alchemy gives a small amount of money whenever a monster is stunned or eliminated in overworld combat. The game says you have a chance, but from my experience, I think it's actually guaranteed. the amount is nothing to scoff at either. You'll be getting around 250 rev per stun or kill. And this is huge considering how many enemies you'll encounter. I have no doubt that farming money in this game will involve the merchant in some way, but at the very least, this hero passive will keep your money supply up for gold attacks. Lastly, there's Trader's Summit, which increases item effectiveness by 20%, and the bonus increases if other party members have the same archetype. The potential of this skill is only clear when you have the maximum bonus. With all party members having the same archetype, the boost goes up to 100%. Attack items in this game deal a flat amount, regardless of any modifiers, save for immunities. And you can dump them all in a single turn for massive damage. Don't be afraid to use your attack items when you need to, you'll get plenty later on. It also affects healing items, so if you want to recover MP quickly, you can temporarily switch over to a team of merchants and use your Magla pills in battle. As for synthesis skills, this is where the merchant falters. They have all reset, which removes all buffs from enemies. It has little use in the early game. There really aren't any enemies that can buff themselves to a level that necessitates this skill. Their other synthesis skill, Fortune Slots, guarantees a critical, but has a low hit rate. It's the same effect as the warrior's solo skill Critical Strike, so not really worth the 2-turn icons it costs. But at least when you're attacking stunned or sleeping enemies, you're guaranteed a critical hit. For inheritance skills, merchants combo well with Diligent Discipline from Monk to increase its critical rate further. Beware the price though, it's 5,000 mag to inherit. It's also worth noting that the merchant has no resistances and has 2 weaknesses, another shortcoming that may prove fatal sometimes. The merchant's damage output also falls off pretty quickly, but even so, the high crit rate and the ability to do damage regardless of resistances is awesome at the start of the game. Trader's Summit can be really strong, but actually maximizing it is resource intensive, something you don't have much of in the early game. But beyond that, the merchant has utility unlike any other class, one that will no doubt see use even beyond the early game. And we arrive to the number 1 spot. Arise, I dub thee the best early game archetype in Metaphor ReFantazio, the Knight archetype. There's not much to say about its default skills. Knight's Proclamation draws enemy aggro. It could potentially save other party members from death. It goes well with the Knight's naturally high defenses. But then there's First Aid, a great skill to keep your party healthy while exploring dungeons. Sure, you can't use it during combat, but come on, it's 2 MP to heal 100 HP. That's a lot of value in comparison to other healing skills, and I think it might prove useful all throughout the game. And once you've gotten the ability to change inheritance skills on the fly, you can slot this into any class temporarily at any time for cheap healing outside of battle. But now let's get into the real power of the Knights, hidden away in their synthesis skills. Jump Thrust is a pierce attack to one foe with medium power. It has a bonus effect that reduces your target's defense, a rarity in the early game, and at just 6 MP, it is an economical choice for taking down tough enemies quicker. However, its other offensive synthesis is where it's really at. The Hammer of Justice deals heavy piercing damage to one foe. And let me tell you, heavy attacks are a premium for early game, but it gets even better. Hammer of Justice also inflicts a one-time weakness to Pierce, and what better attack to use up the debuff on with another Hammer of Justice. This will give you a damage boost as well as bonus turn icons. It also reapplies the Pierce weakness, so you can just do it again. This move alone makes Knights the boss breaker of early game Metaphor ReFantazio. Synthesis skills with more raw power exist, like the Mage's Mini of 4 and the Warrior's Peerless Stone Cleaver, but those cost 3 turn icons. Hammer of Justice, on the other hand, costs just 2 and combos into itself to reduce its cost further. Knights have to settle in the front row to maximize their damage, but their other skills will actually help them take hits. Ironclad Bond increases their defense passively, and Guard Lore applies a temporary defense buff every fight. These combined can actually make front row Knights take less damage than back row members, although you do need multiple Knights in your party to accomplish this. You do need to have either a Monk or a Merchant teammate to use Hammer of Justice, and it also costs 18 MP, so it's not that cheap. unfortunately neither monk nor merchant are MP intensive, so you should have plenty of resources there. You can add some extra utility to your knights via their inherited skill. Slap on a healing skill or perhaps Taru Kaja from Seeker to add even more damage. Indeed, it's the damage modifiers that distinguishes Hammer of Justice apart from Trader's Summit. You can increase your knight's damage with buffs and debuffs, while attack items are unaffected. The knight also has two protective synthesis skills, Protect Guard and Magic Guard, which applies a single turn attack block to allies. It's used as situational, but with a well-timed use and maybe some luck, you can reduce your enemy's actions with this. Finally, knights also have a natural resistance against slash attacks, which is actually quite common in the early game. Warriors and monks might exude an aura of raw power, but pair them with knights and they'll be easily outclassed. There is another synthesis skill from the Gunner archetype called Mania Bullet, which functions similarly to Hammer of Justice. However, that archetype is unlocked a bit later. I actually was debating to myself whether the merchant is actually better overall than the knight. Both are really powerful, but for this list, I picked the knight for number 1 because of its flexibility in combat. Merchants count on landing critical hits, which is based on luck. Knights, on the other hand, have more consistent damage, plus they can pivot to a defensive role if needed. But of course, if your enemy is immune to pierce, you're better off using something else for damage. Oh, and a reminder from me, I suggest you move to the back row when using Knight's Proclamation. You know, the Knight's Provoke skill, it just makes sense. Okay, that's the top 3 archetypes for the early game. What do you think are the best early game archetypes? Let me know in the comments. Consider leaving a like as well, it'll help me out so much with the YouTube algorithm. This is slowly turning into an Atlus JRPG channel, which I honestly don't mind. So if that's your thing, or you just like what I do here, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, I hope you have a lovely day. See you next video.